Alright, guys, I'm back with another low quality video. Um, Anyways, I've been meaning to get to talking about this book for quite a while. If anything, it should be called like Demographics of the Status Quo, because the title of this book does not give it justice, honestly. Alright, so Reproductive Racism by Suzanne Shultz. She goes over false intuition of demographics as a science, breaking down our use of immigrants based on racist assumptions and interactions in the form of cold data projections beyond culture. Uh, the book mostly takes place in Germany, with their summer of migration in 2015 and its current dynamics with Ukrainian immigrants in the war in February 2022, although Ukrainian migrants are going other places too, but yeah. Whether or not they count whether or not they count as their version of white in their caste system. One assumption about immigrants is the automatic high fertility, but as they, quote, assimilate, their patterns obviously change to the original nation. But in general, this awareness from older shrinking nations in the insecure capitalist perception causes older nations to take our values to other nations to engineer their numbers through contraception, abortion, and subaltern living, which just means like basic living standards, but not up to the standards that we live here. We could easily give them like modern living that we have in America over there, and like teach them over there to have plumbers and etc. and fix their infrastructure over there, but hence subaltern because we just keep them at a bare minimum. Okay, so with the worldwide aging and shrinking nations and a state of capitalism causing a feedback loop for fear of white values collapsing, and whatever identity the nation, the original nation, thinks itself as, not just white. Uh, Germany, thus, is turning far right, just like Ben Wattenberg's prediction for the U.S. destabilization because of government policy and national schemes that aren't the fault of the people, but there seems to be a conservative backlash. Um, but elites balancing the illusion of freedom and national security. But with age and not enough babies, it logically makes sense to have immigration. But even then, it's not so simple. The book rightfully criticizes demography as, quote, the science of the status quo, end quote. Demographers and those working close with population data have to be reminded it's not destiny or future telling necessarily, but they certainly can influence policy to go against the population trend or go with it. See the predictions as what ifs or forecasting. It can't know everything, just merely solidified assumptions of history, culture, and wealth, but doesn't really help solve capitalist exploitation that leads to demographic disparities. As sickness, war, tribalism become symbolic with the demographic feedback loop. After World War II ended, the politics of eugenics and population engineering changed to fit the public eye in the fears and memory of the Holocaust. But since 2004, Germany was working on demographic schemes. As most industrial nations aged, had less kids, better sanitary methods, food, water, etc., it made us realize the third world was rapidly fertile despite none of these luxuries. So industrial world in its neo-Malthusian hands had the pro-natalist policy for their people at home in one hand, not the poor or people on welfare who are transitioned to workfare for the economy, and the antenatal policy for the third world in the other. The far right and neoliberal push on what types of people go into the Asian countries has depended on selection of specific tasks and the culture memory flowing through the society, but the neo-Malthusian ideology of the capitalist classist racist sexist system depends on the balance of, quote, migrants and, quote, Germans. The migrants hoping to prop up the caste system, but not enough to, quote, assimilate to the, quote, migrant altogether. So fear of national security in fear of national security and the fear of resources and data being tainted by some notion of national decay via original population. The population issue they see is heavily connected to controlling women's bodies. and seeing war-torn, starving nations tyrant territory is seen as unchanging and demographic destiny, as Elon Musk has pointed out recently, which I will get to. This is a great segue, honestly, to a much bigger project that I've been meaning to get to, what is happening in the world. Okay. Um, so, older nations, based on demographic destiny and futile assumptions, fund mass sterilization and contraceptives to them, or the phenomenon of NGOs to support women's rights, and eventually a UN recognition for women's autonomy in the face of state engineering. The author reminds us not to confuse the eugenic mutilation and women choosing birth control, as the history of eugenics and women's health overlap. There's a lot of authors actually that would like us to know that despite whatever malpractice has happened with abortion, this should not be overlapped with women's rights. Conservatives are doing this right now. The new Speaker of the House has been saying this. Okay. Where was I? Oh yes. The Cairo Consensus in the 1990s by UN recognition was basically the most feminist move ever to protect against the state engineering, but it didn't go far enough, implying a breakdown of rights that were not codified, just like Roe was never codified or was a symptom of the Cairo breakdown, thus open for radicals to remove. Although Cairo could have been a front to pretend it was for uh, feminine rights while working with feminists, specific feminists, honestly. Not all women were on the table to be given this respect, unfortunately. COVID-19 revealed discriminatory necropolitics, such as the anti-vaccine herd movement in the UK and Western poor people being harmed the most by the Supreme Court move to strip Roe during COVID lockdown. The Malthusian hand was never actually truly prevented under these principles, not being represented strongly enough. So the third world global south was still the broader target, despite feminist NGOs. Brazilian feminist and LGBT activists also caught in the fray of human rights violations being eroded. The anti-LGBT and anti-abortion is mostly a pro-natalist strategy than a Malthusian fear, but they're one and the same. The framework of the narratives involve the narratives in the book, involve examples and criticisms of Foucauldian ideology, mostly through the lens of biopower and biopolitics that explains the stratification of nations, people, and issues as intersecting histories to manipulate history on a mass scale in data form. Human rights violations shared across the human spectrum despite no former interaction. Populations equally used for capitalist analysis and petty financial potential, mostly in the old eyes of the perceived aging and shrinking societies. And in his book, Society Must Be Defended, implies some populations are chosen to live or die by complex reductionist means unseen as genocide and raise no eyebrows, as it is just innocent looking policy. Usually, like, think of the children type of policies that kind of get at the heartstring, or like you got to watch out for like abortion policies that connect with population advocacy, because that's also like kind of a red flag. Individuals deserve abortion, but this should not be rhetoric that is spun with population. Okay, there are economic principles that are gone over throughout the book, some actually problematic sounding particulars, which I will go over in a second. Okay, the first one, brain gain and drain. When taking in immigration, it boosts the information and utility knowledge to support the economy. It's possible the migrant is judged and critiqued more, needing to know information that the native person doesn't need to know in order to survive. This could also imply a negligence of the current educational system on the native population, uh, creating artificially stunted people where it's possible to help them. 2. Triple Win Program, which is based on population decline issues. This involves solving labor market problems involving healthcare utility by bringing in more nurses into the country, and solves the country's brain drain issue by bringing in more qualified people or training them, thus supporting the aging and shrinking nation. Alright. And the problematic sounding one is replacement migration. The controversial title is not what it seems. It simply means bringing in people into countries where there is a perceived population decline, and it makes sense for bodies in the working class. And you can't really make the populace have children, even if you pay them, because it just goes against their lifestyle and what they might want. The replacement migration is not to be confused with bigoted anti-Semitic screeds from works from early 1900 Russian Empire, quote, Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or The Great Gatsby's Rising Tide of Color, and the Industrial Revolution icon Henry Ford, the Dearborn Independent, which Hitler praised in Mein Kampf. Alright. So, that'll be that for now. Peace.